Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. Sounded like I was listening to WRZR there for a minute. I appreciated those last few songs. Yeah. All right. You know, obviously I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and I'm not going to deep dive into the Constitution in just a few minutes, but I tell you there's some things that we don't have to be constitutional lawyers to sort of know right from wrong, and we just need to, we know in our gut what's right and what's wrong, and let's just talk about a few of those things. I want to start out by saying that, you know, I'm from Perry Township in the county of Martin in the sovereign state of Indiana. Indiana is a member of the Federated Union of the United States of America. You know, our founding fathers had a belief and a fear of a strong federated government, though they saw the need for some of it. And they believed 50 states competing with each other would provide a rich and rewarding life if the 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, were in full force, where we all had equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. A couple of years ago, I stood on this podium and spoke to the Tea Party for the first time, and I actually had a couple of things on my mind that day while talking about the federal debt. I'd also planned to hike to Lafayette that I left that day, so I was eager to move on. I went home, put my backpack on, and for some reason started walking to Lafayette through the back roads of Indiana. I spent the first night in Regelsville, and it got more interesting as time went on. And I won't tell you all the gory details of that trip and the sore feet and the bad knees and the achy hips. But you got a lot of time to think when you're walking. And got up into Putnam County, almost to Montgomery County, getting close to Purdue University, where my daughter goes to school or college. And walking along the road, minding my own business, I got accosted by a police officer. Now, I will admit that the police officer was very polite, but he also was very intent on getting my identification. And this particular police officer made it clear that if I didn't provide him this identification, that my walking days to Purdue were over, that I would be going to Greencastle. I asked him, you know, what I did wrong. I asked him if I was speeding, and I think that was the wrong thing to say. Right. I found out in the state of Indiana, you can be accosted by a police officer for any reason and ask for identification. I did inquire to the person why in Arizona that particular individuals, we could even ask for papers or identification if we suspected them of any kind of infraction. He said that was a problem in Arizona, not in Indiana. Several years ago, I had written an article in the paper called One Piece at a Time. It was a play off an old Johnny Cash song that talked about Johnny working for General Motors, and he was taking a fender from a particular layer of a car, stealing nuts and bolts in his lunchbox, and as time went on, he'd actually built a Cadillac that was like no other. The play on the story was that our freedoms are being eroded one piece at a time. It's hard to understand it when it's not all of a sudden. A little piece here, little piece there. You know, and pretty soon we don't look like Americans anymore. At least not the Americans the founding fathers had envisioned that we would be. You know, I see now that I'm told that I will have to buy health care. I'm going to be told how it's going to be presented to our employees. I'm told we have to do this because there is no competition, even though the lack of competition in healthcare was created by antitrust legislation the federal government enacted to start with. Just none of it makes sense. You know, I'm just a common sense guy, roots in Rutherford Township, made it all the way to Lagodi. In the summer of 1787, when the founding fathers realized that the Articles of Confederation were just too loose, and they were very concerned about creating a federal government that was stronger, but they knew somehow they had to do something. When they emerged at the end of the summer, hot, could you imagine a hot summer, no air conditioning, and the way those guys dressed, and the wigs they wore, Surprised that some of them even survived it. But Benjamin Franklin emerged, and allegedly a woman asked her, "Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." You see, early on, almost from the beginning, that the Constitution was drafted and the final draft approved, which was on September 17th, one day after today, tomorrow, 1787, there were a lot of concerns that we would not be able to keep our republic. That sooner or later, we would figure out how to vote treasurers right out of the treasury for ourselves, that our government would become so strong and all the enumerated powers so twisted that almost anything would go. That they could pick the winners and losers in business. They could redirect wealth to whatever place they wanted. And eventually a transformation of America would occur from the people to the government. Those fights occurred early on, those known as Federalists, and those known, interestingly enough, as Democratic Republicans. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams were Federalists. They had a Supreme Court justice, John Marshall, who was a Federalist. And almost immediately, there began a fight over words. Words in the Constitution that miraculously began to take on new meanings as a few years passed here and there. Jefferson was so appalled by this reinterpretation in his own lifetime that he warned that the Constitution, if they continued down this path, would in some future date be reduced to a single phrase or meaningless. That it just basically, all the words in there, he made the argument, why have we written these words if it wasn't to restrict the government from what it could do? But somewhere over time, it's been evolved to, well, it doesn't say I can't do that. And as I look across the world today, across our country, I think we can find many of our problems rooted into the interpretation of the Constitution as a very progressive living document instead of what it was, a limitation of government power. I mean, just think about it for a second. How could Obamacare under a Jeffersonian viewpoint ever be approved unless it was amended to the Constitution and 3/4 of the states would vote for it? Nowhere I read in our Constitution where this is even feasible. The social programs, and I'm not talking just about welfare, we tend to seize on that. But our social programs and investments, since the 30s, what do we have to show for it, really? And even, is it even legal? It just seems like we all just accept the fact that if it's a law, it must have been done right. Since the 30s, we're $16 trillion in debt. The great experiment to transfer wealth from one sector to another, to pick the winners and losers, has resulted in more Americans in poverty than any time in our history per capita, both in real numbers and per capita. And how's that working for us, really? You know, one of the things our government has done very well is protected us. But even in our Constitution, there's great limits to the power that our government can have over military that are just totally ignored. But that amplifies the problem that I think I see, is that if it seems okay, well, this one time it's okay because it's really a good thing. But that just creeps into everything that we do. And after a couple hundred years, where are we really? We're seeing American businesses leave the country and grows, not just because the labor's cheaper, but because it takes 12 years to do an environmental impact study to build any kind of a factory. We have more energy reserves in this country than almost anyone, but yet we can't get to them because it's a constant litigation fight in the courts. EPA regulations flying drones over farms in Iowa. It's just unbelievably not common sense what we're doing to ourselves. And the question always comes back to how constitutionally, from something that we started with, so basic, has become so complex that none of us really understand it. The laws are just amazing that you can take a few words and turn them into mountains of documents. Just like the Affordable Health Care Act, we have to pass it to see what's in it. They don't even know what the rules are yet. It's just amazing. And the truth of the matter is, you and I are responsible for it because we let it happen. The states became intoxicated with federal money. That wasn't from the taxpayer. It was loaned or printed. The elixir of a lot of money floating around seemed like a good thing to do until we've all become addicted to it. There's been a few amendments to the Constitution that has created this thing I call Fedzilla. One of them was the 16th Amendment to the United States. You all know what the 16th Amendment is, right? It's the income tax amendment, where essentially anything goes. And once the government had that, anything went. The money flowed, the programs got bigger, our human tendency to want to help our fellow man. We started to transform our value systems into government. Amazing amount of money has transferred hands between the private sector and the federal government. One of the things that's mind-boggling to me, watching the news in the evening, how we worship our government. And again, I'm not against our government. But it's amazing that we look at guys like Mitt Romney, who's going to create 12 million jobs, or Barack Obama, who needs 4 more years to finish what he couldn't do in the first 4 terms. These guys don't create jobs for us. They inhibit jobs. Why is it that are we so dependent on the government that we have to believe that they're going to take care of us and create jobs for us? What happened to the business guys that used to be up here on Main Street? We still have some, but where are they? When was the last time America, other than Apple Corporation, had an innovative idea that drove our economy instead of forcing our companies to go overseas to compete? Our policies, I just don't see where in the Constitution the federal government has this kind of authority, but we take it for granted. I wonder what would happen if Jefferson had won the argument of the day, that the Constitution would be interpreted by strictly what this thing says. They created an amendment process. If you want affordable health care, pass an amendment. If you want the federal government involved in your high school education, pass an amendment. But it was far easier for the progressives, the liberals of their day, to change the meaning of the words. Even in the time of the people of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who actually created the documents. So it's really going to boil down to a fundamental question. Do you believe in a system of central planning? Do we believe in a system where the outcomes are guaranteed? Do we believe in a system of forced charity where we take from one sector to give to another? Or do we believe in more handouts, taking away productive entrepreneurs out of the equation, forcing them to leave the country, forcing them just to give up? Why do it anymore? You know, the Constitution is supposed to protect us from our government. It's the consent of the governed that we have a government. The federal government got all of its power from the states, and hence the people. But yet, apathy in this country, in this community, reigns. I talk to my friends downtown, try to feel them out about what they think, and the view is, well, what can you do? I understand that. Thank God Samuel Adams, George Washington, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, thank God they didn't feel that way. Why do we? The Founding Fathers created the federal government to serve the sovereign states of the United States and the people. They wanted these independent states because they believed competing against each other would be innovative. That the Constitution, with its Bill of Rights, where everybody had equal opportunity, little restriction, would take the ingenuity of their own minds, of their own beliefs, free from persecution of religion or of speech, and create something that was truly remarkable. Now, how many of you believe that that thought process turned out pretty good? Absolutely. But I think it's under assault. I think every law that's passed has a cost. The cost of the economic prosperity of the country and to our own personal freedoms. Every time we take on another subject of transference of government control, they take it not out of thin air, but they take it from us. They squander our innovation. They don't trust us. That's what it boils down to. These guys knew something about that because they were only a generation or so removed from the tyranny of a monarchy. All across Europe, you're born into a class system, and no matter how smart, no matter how great of an idea you had, you were suppressed. You know, they say history repeats itself because we don't learn from our past mistakes. But I also believe that history repeats itself because of our own self-interest. We're in a battle today. We're in a battle about the future of our country, not in terms of a Republican being in or a Democrat being in. It's about ideology. It's about the belief in this thing called the Constitution, and how much are we going to pervert the words to gain our own self-interest. Recently, back in August, my family, we went up to Purdue University to attend my daughter's graduation. And I was a very proud father because I knew in that moment I would never have to send another check to Purdue University. But on top of that, I listened to a gentleman open up his little speech, and he told a story that was very inspiring, very prophetic. Out in the Southwest, in an oil town, a big refinery had caught on fire. It was a big fire that completely consumed the ability of the petroleum company to contain it. It was a major issue. It was about to spread to the town. Then out of nowhere, came this little fire truck, streaming past all the people who pulled back, all the great firefighting equipment that was there, and stormed right into the fire. And these firemen, few that they were, jumped off the truck, and they fought like hell to put that fire out. And no one knew exactly how this was going to turn out, but slowly but surely they gained control of the fire. And then the ones who were just watching, looking, decided to join the fight. After it was all said and done, a few months later, the oil company and the townspeople got together and awarded the local firefighters a $100,000 check. And in the ceremony, much like today maybe, they asked the fire chief, well, what are you going to do with this money? And his first comment was, well, we're going to fix the brakes on that old fire engine. You know, sometimes an issue is thrust upon us. Sometimes we thrust ourselves into a problem. But most of the time, we just find ourselves in the middle of it. And we got a choice. We're going to fight, we're going to lay down. How prophetic was Benjamin Franklin when he said, "A republic if you can keep it"? There's a lot of apathy in this country that everybody believes just because we're Americans, it'll work out somehow. And that may be the case. American exceptionalism isn't because of our government. It's because of the people. It's because of us. But where's the balance of power these days? Is it with the government or is it with the people? So I have a challenge. A challenge for you. A challenge for me. I'm going to ask you a question. Who are you? Are you a Federalist? Do you believe in a strong central government? Are you a Democrat? Republican? You know, personally, I'm tired of the two-political party system. It's all about their self-interest. People blindly support their party. You know, a few years ago, I wrote an article in the Lagodi Tribune called "A Tea in a Road." It was before the Tea Party was in existence. Kind of interesting how that turned out. Tea is a T, not T-E-A. And I was talking about this very subject, how the parties are corrupt. You know, I'm sorry if I offend you Republicans. I'm sorry if I offend you Democrats. It's what I believe. Are you a progressive who believes the federal government is the ultimate authority and therefore can usurp all the states' rights? To do anything it wants? To force you to buy health care because of the 16th Amendment? Does that even make sense? Force businesses to go bankrupt to comply with it? Well, let me ask you something else. Are you the sons and daughters of founding fathers? The protectors of the American Revolution? Are you the people that Adams and Jefferson believed in the end days, when these times that we're upon would occur, would do the right thing? So it's really, we can complain about the government, we can complain about our state government, we can complain about all of it, but in the end it's up to us, isn't it? I wonder what our founding fathers would do today if somehow they could reemerge on this square, pick up a few newspapers, start reading some of the court cases. I wonder what they'd really think. I got an idea what they might think. I think there would be a second American Revolution, because this is not what they thought was going to happen. So I'm not calling for revolution, obviously, but there ought to be a revolution in your soul about who you are. Are you a blind Democrat? Are you a blind Republican? Or are you a traditionalist who believes in the Constitution? If we had just followed the footprint for which we were provided, we wouldn't be in all these messes around the world. We wouldn't be holding to the Chinese. And we wouldn't have a Federal Reserve System printing $40 billion a month out of thin air that causes our prices at the grocery store to rise. Because you see, Congress is too chicken to tax us for what they're really spending. So they hide it by printing money, and you just don't know it. And you don't understand why the prices go up at the store, why oil goes through the roof. And they tell us it's because of this in Iran or this in Iraq, and those have spikes and issues, but that's all temporary. The real issue is that half of our federal debt is printed money. It's not backed by anything. It's not loaned from any country. I mean, when I look in the Constitution, what gives them the right to have a Federal Reserve? What gives them the right to print money, to take a dollar bill? Do you ever think about how a dollar bill gets into the money supply? How did you get your hands on the first? When the first dollar was printed, how did it get to us? I only know of two ways, but I'm, again, from Martin County, so maybe I haven't got this figured out. It gets loaned out of a bank, or the government spends it directly. But either way, it's dead. All money is dead in paper money. Our Constitution says that they can coin and stamp coin or metal, and that they have weights and measures. We're supposed to be on the gold standard, but yet we're in a fractional reserve currency created in 1913. You know, the first real Democratic president was a guy named Andrew Jackson, and he eliminated the central bank. One of my heroes. But it reemerged in 1913. And now the Federal Reserve is involved in trying to help employment. I just don't understand this. But again, some of this stuff is way over my head. So I like to keep it simple. There's 18, depending who you talk to, 30 enumerated powers in the Constitution. And the 10th Amendment clearly states, if it's not here, it's reserved to the people, or the states or the people. There's a lot going on that I don't see in the Constitution, but yet it exists in this country. So, I ask you again, who are you? Will you be the Americans that Jefferson Adams believed in so firmly, will do the right thing? Would you step up and try to make a change? I heard earlier Dennis Jones say something that Thomas Jefferson said that's one of my favorite quotes. The government that's big enough to give you everything you want is also strong enough to take everything you have. Well, I'll give you a proposition. They're halfway there. Because whether you realize it or not, you're taxed at about 50%. But they don't have to tax the other 50% because with deficit spending and printing money through the Federal Reserve, they'll take the rest of it that way. Every day you're paying a tax and inflation. You just do not understand why, maybe, and I don't mean to talk down, but that's the facts. So the day of reckoning is coming, unless you and the sons and daughters of the American Revolution step forward, make a change. And that's just not with the politicians. That's in your own daily behavior. May God bless your endeavors. Thank you.